Hi, my name is Nicole Grabow. I work with the Midwest Art Conservation Center. I'm an objects conservator there, and I'm also the preservation conservator. We're a nonprofit regional center that does a variety of work throughout the Midwest and beyond, and I'm here at ATALM 2017 presenting on testing for arsenic. And what I'd like to go over today is how to sample an object that might be in your collection in case you would like to test it for arsenic. Arsenic was used as a pesticide throughout collections in both private and museum collections up until about the 1960s. Arsenic was a very common pesticide. It's a heavy metal and it is toxic. So although it poses no risk to the cultural material itself, it is a risk to people. And so if collections materials have been treated with arsenic, it's important to know that they have been so that we can minimize handling. There is a spot test for arsenic, which I will go over in another session, but for now I just wanted to talk about sampling your artifact. Because what you can do is you can take samples from your artifact and then have those sent away and have someone else test them for the arsenic itself. So for example, you could have them sent to us and we could test the materials. The sampling itself is relatively straightforward. And what you need to know is basically that any object you should assume that it is or has a toxic substance on it unless you know otherwise, if you have reason to suspect it. The materials that are most susceptible to insect damage are those that are most likely to have been treated by pesticides, and that includes fur, feathers, wool, and silk, and sometimes hides. Those things are particularly delicious to bugs, and it was a good, kind of museum policy to treat them with pesticides to prevent the bugs from eating them. When I'm looking at an artifact and assessing its risk for being contaminated with a pesticide, I look at whether or not it's one of those materials, and then I look at whether there's any evidence of insect damage on it. If an artifact is made of fur or feathers and it's more than 50 or 60 years old and it doesn't show any sign of insect damage, that is an immediate red flag for me. That makes me think that it may have been treated with a pesticide. Look to institutional records for information about pesticides that may have been used on collections materials. If anything is being repatriated to a tribal community, it's a good thing to request that the museum does, that they test it for pesticides before they return the object. So right now what we've got here is a wooden object that has paint on it. It's part of a larger sculpture. Now this is not a particularly tasty artifact, so I don't really have any reason to suspect it to have been treated with pesticides, but for the purposes of our demonstration today, it will suffice anyway. Now we are going to be using water to take our sample. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to assess your object to determine whether or not it might be vulnerable to water, if there are any pigments or dyes that might be water soluble. And I recommend that you do a little tiny spot test beforehand just to make sure. If you do have material that's water soluble, you can still go ahead and do the arsenic testing, but it's just nice to know. It's nice to be prepared. So what I'm doing here, and you'll be rolling a swab for your sampling, so let me go through it. I have here a bamboo skewer. These are the kind that you can buy at the grocery store, and some loose cotton. You can also use cotton Q-tips for this, but I prefer to roll my own because I can make them smaller and it's less expensive. So what you do is you take the pointy end of the stick and you just reach into your cotton and you grab a little bit. That's too much. You just kind of grab a little bit and then you wrap it tightly around. And then this is a particularly small swab because what I'm doing is I'm doing just a test area to see if it's going to be moisture sensitive. So I want to use something that's pretty small. And then in this vial here, I have some distilled water. Deionized water is also good, but it should be either distilled or deionized. I'm just going to moisten my swab lightly. Now the cotton at the end should be wet enough so that you can see that it's saturated, but not so wet that it's glistening. If it's too wet, and this is actually not wet enough, but if it's too wet so that it's kind of glistening, you can sort of roll it on your paper to get some of that excess moisture off. And then choose an area that is maybe not quite so obvious for your water test, and just press the swab, the moist swab, against the object and kind of wiggle it a little with just some gentle pressure. And what we're looking for is any kind of change in the surface. You're looking to see if you get any paint that comes off on your swab. I got some dirt off, but no actual paint. Or if you notice any kind of bleeding or darkening, discoloration in the area where the moisture's been applied. If you see anything like that, then you know that you do have a moisture-sensitive material. This is not, we didn't get anything on this, so this is not moisture-sensitive. But if you do have something that's moisture-sensitive, you just want to be particularly careful that you work quickly, you don't let the water dwell on the surface for a long period of time, and you don't sample in areas that are going to be very visibly noticeable. So now that we've done our spot test, we are ready to go ahead and sample the object. Now we're going to go ahead and collect to make a swab on our stick, just as we did before. This one's a little bit bigger. This is about the size that you want, about the size of a Q-tip, maybe a little bit smaller than a Q-tip. We moisten it in our distilled water. And again, you want to make sure that the swab is moist but not so wet that it's glistening. And then what we're going to do is we're going to roll the swab over the surface of the object. We're going to collect a sample from 5 to 7 different areas on the object. The arsenic may not have been applied evenly. It may still be present in some areas, but it may have fallen off of others. So we want to make sure that we get a representative sample. We want to make sure that we do collect any arsenic that might be present. Crevices and corners are good places where arsenic can collect. Arsenic is present usually as a white powder, so if you see any white powder on the surface, that's a good spot to go for your sampling. But right now, I'm just going to choose a few different areas. I'm going to start with the hoof here, and I'm just going to apply very gentle pressure, and I'm just going to roll it over once. And then I'm going to take the tip, and I'm going to set it aside. So that's the first one. Roll another. Slightly moist, making sure it's not glistening. That looks a little wet. Roll off the excess. And then I'm going to go for one of these little crevices here. Take the tip off. Sample number 3, maybe this end of the object. And you can see just very gentle pressure. Arsenic is very readily soluble in water. So just rolling it across the surface once, it's all that's needed. And you can see that if you did have an object that was sensitive to moisture, just controlling the dampness of your swab and making sure that your touch is very light and quick will ensure that you don't get a really strong reaction. It's just good to know ahead of time if you have moisture-sensitive material, but you should still be able to sample. Unless you have something that's really, really, really reactive, in which case, call me. So there, now we've got a collection of swabs from various locations on our object. And what you can do with these is, if you would like to send them away for testing, I've collected them on a piece of Tyvek, but you can put them in a Ziploc bag, label them to indicate which object they're from. Keep a group of swabs from one object together. If you're sampling several different objects, you want to put them in individually wrapped Ziploc bags with each one labeled separately. You can label them with the accession number or a brief description of the object. And then these swabs will be ready to be sent away for sampling. If you're going to be doing your own arsenic testing using an arsenic test kit, what you can do is you can use these swabs to create your sample solution. And that's something that I'll be talking about in one of the next videos. So thank you.